Psychology? Brains, the human mind. Fascinating.
But what is psychology?
Oh, well, psychology is the scientific study of the brain and its processes that is tested through scientific research. It studies the mental processes of humans and animals.
Psychologists have four main goals: to describe, explain, predict, and influence behavior. To ensure the data is collected accurately, psychologists use the scientific method. This allows psychologists to demonstrate and support theories.
Psychology has been studied since ancient Greece. Now, it has evolved since then, becoming more accurate and more specific. An American named William James became known as the father of psychology after he wrote the first psychology textbook and taught the first psychology class.
Many of the older ideas have become outdated, and psychologists seek to understand the unconscious mind now. A man named Sigmund Freud became a pioneer in this field and made many advances in psychoanalytic psychology. Behavioral psychology focuses on how organisms learn or modify their behavior. Psychologists like John B. Watson and Ivan Pavlov made incredible strides in this field.
There are many different areas of psychology that are extremely unique and focus on very different things. Because of this, there are many different jobs you can get through psychology. You can become a psychologist, a scientist who studies the mind and behavior of animals, or you can become a psychiatrist, a medical doctor who deals with mental, emotional, and behavioral disorders.
You can be a clinical psychologist, a counseling psychologist, a developmental psychologist, a community psychologist, an industrial psychologist, an environmental psychologist, or countless others. Every one of these professions is important and has its possibility to earn a large salary. The field of psychology is an ever-expanding area full of opportunity and freedom.
Because psychology is a branch of science, those who work in it must be able to conduct research. To begin, a psychologist must select samples, which are relatively small groups out of the total populations under study.
Now, a sample must represent the population as a whole, not just specific members. Say you're taking a sample of average heights of women. Taking a sample of only college basketball players would be very skewed.
There are two ways to avoid non-representative samples. One is to take a random sample, and the other is to take a stratified sample. A random sample gives each individual an equal chance. A stratified sample picks out specific members of a population to properly represent the whole.
The method of research is naturalistic observation, when a psychologist observes a patient in their natural setting, so as to not cause them to behave in a way that they would to alter the study. A case study is an intensive study of a person or group. Most case studies combine long-term observations with diaries, tests, and interviews. Most case studies can last multiple years before it's finished.
Longitudinal studies are somewhat similar to case studies. In longitudinal studies, a psychologist studies the same group of people at regular intervals over a period of years and determines if and how a person's behavior or emotions have changed.
Who? What? Where? When? Why? How?
Exactly! There are many, many ways that a person or an animal can learn. One of the most well-known ways is classical conditioning. This is a process where associations are made between a natural stimulus and a neutral stimulus. This was discovered by a Russian psychologist named Ivan Pavlov. He used dogs in his experiment, but humans are also affected by this conditioning. Consider the following. I'm giving my subject chocolate chips while I play a bumpin' tune, and the chocolate makes her drool. Watch now. When I play the song, she drools without any chocolate. Play the song.
Everybody get up, it's time to slam now. We got the real jam going down. Welcome to the Space Jam. Here's your chance, do your dance at the Space Jam.
Now turn it off. And turn it back on.
Everybody get up, it's time to slam.
Have your parents ever punished you for breaking the rules? Ever rewarded you for following them? If so, you have been conditioned! Operant conditioning is a form of learning that involves behavior and its consequences. When behavior is reinforced, the action is likely to be repeated or avoided, based on the response of the reinforcer. If you get grounded for failing a test, you are less likely to fail another test because you want to avoid being grounded.
Frequency and timing are vital to operant conditioning. Schedules of reinforcement help determine the effectiveness of responses and the length of time that a behavior is maintained. Fixed ratio schedules require a specific number of responses before the behavior is reinforced. Variable ratio schedules, however, do not require a specific number of responses, and reinforcement is given randomly. Fixed interval schedules require a specific amount of time to elapse before reinforcement is given. For example, if a student knows that a quiz is coming up, they're going to study hard the night before. However, if the quizzes are on a variable interval schedule, they're given at random times, and students will likely study more frequently because a quiz could happen at any time.
Wow, that was a lot of information. Next, I'm going to show you how to remember it all. Let's take a trip down memory lane and learn about memory. Who sings your favorite song? Who is your best friend in preschool? To recall this information, you use your memory processes. The first stage of memory process is encoding, or the transformation of information so the nervous system can process it.
You use your senses to encode and establish memories. Here's an example. Mike Juice is using his sense of touch to establish the memory of pain and is teaching himself not to run into walls.
That was a smashing experience.
After encoding, the information goes into storage, the process by which information is maintained over a period of time. How much information is stored depends on how much effort was put into the encoding process.
Don't run into walls. Don't run into walls. Stop. Don't run into walls.
The third and final process of memory is retrieval, where one obtains information that was previously stored in memory. The difficulty of retrieving a memory is determined by how efficiently the memory was encoded and stored.
Don't run into walls.
There are 3 stages of memory: sensory, short-term, and long-term memory. Sensory is a very brief memory storage immediately followed by stimulation. In fact, it only lasts a few seconds before moving on to either long-term or short-term memory. Short-term memory is memory that is limited in capacity to about 7 items and in duration by the subject active rehearsal. Finally, long-term memory is the storage of information over an extensive period of time.
You can also lose your memories. This process is called amnesia. It can result from a blow to the head or other types of brain damage. Amnesia can also be caused by drug use or heavy alcoholism.
Who am I? Where am I? Maybe I shouldn't have hit my head on that wall.
Motivation and emotions are what make us unique. We find satisfaction in striving to be the next level of excellence. In the Atkinson expectancy value theorem, it is explained that our estimated likelihood of success and value is simply how much the goal is worth to you. So, if you want it bad enough, then nothing can stop you.
Meanwhile, the competence theory tells us that if the task is too easy or too hard, that we do not learn anything. But to improve competency, we have to choose moderately difficult tasks where you have the equal chance of success and failure.
With motivation comes Maslow's hierarchy, where he describes human behavior. 1. Biological. Hunger, thirst, and warmth. 2. Safety, avoiding danger. 3. Attachment, wanting to belong to something. 4. Esteem, seeing oneself as competent and effective. 5. Self-actualization, being all that you can possibly be. It is based on human needs. To go to the highest point on the pyramid, you need to fulfill every other level.
There is an unclear line between emotion and motivations. Emotion works like a biological drive, helps our feelings energize us and makes us pursue a goal, and it also helps make decisions.
Emotions are the result of genetic learning, especially in early life. Our facial expressions are innate. That is part of our biological inheritance.
There are 3 parts of emotion. The physical aspect has to do with the emotion with physical arousal. Behavioral is the outward expression of the emotion, such as body language. Cognitive concerns with how we think or interpret a situation which affects our emotion. Emotional intelligence is the ability to perceive, imagine, and understand emotion, and to understand information in decision making.
Problem solving is very important in our everyday lives. It shows originality and creativity. Cognitive building blocks are the processes of thinking that is distributed throughout the brain, especially in the frontal lobe. Cognitive is another term for thinking, knowing, and remembering. You may view thinking as changing and reorganizing the information stored in the memory to create our new transformation information.
Think of the units of thought. You have mental images, symbols, artificials, and hierarchies. Mental images are the most primitive mental representation of the previously stored sensory experiences. Symbols are more abstract and use sounds or designs to represent an object, mainly used for chunking large information together. Artificials are formed by logical and specific rules, while hierarchies help us to group concepts into subcategories with broader categories.
There are two types of thinking. There is direct, convergent, and non-direct, divergent. Direct is a logical attempt to reach a specific goal by narrowing down a list of possibilities to arrive at a single answer, like bridging a mental gap between two problems: money and bills to pay, having cancer and finding a cure. Non-direct thinking is the polar opposite. It is free-flowing thoughts with no particular plan and depends more on an image. It's an ability to produce many alternative ideas. Non-direct or divergent thinking is linked to creativity.
When considering all the ways of thinking when solving problems, here are ways people strategize when solving problems. There are algorithms. These are step-by-step procedures that guarantee a solution, logical rule or procedure that guarantees solving a particular problem.
Another way is heuristic. It's a rule of thumb strategy that often allows us to make judgment and solve problems efficiently. The only problem is that when you take shortcuts like the heuristic strategy, there's often mistakes.
All problem solving requires some creativity, originality, fluency, and flexibility.
Oh, and don't forget insight. This involves a sudden light bulb or a realization of a solution to a problem. Did you know that 56% of the American population meets the criteria for a diagnosable psychological disorder? As Thomas Zara states, most people we call mentally ill aren't ill. They just have problems with living. So, where do you draw the line with mentally ill and just having problems?
DSM-4TR is the widely used classification system for psychological disorders, made by the American Psychological Association. It provides detailed descriptions of systems and contains over 200 categories grouped into 17 major categories.
5 guidelines for making decisions about symptoms are: Axis 1, current clinical disorder; Axis 2, personality disorder and mental retardation; Axis 3, general medical information; Axis 4, psychosocial and environmental problems and stress levels; and Axis 5, global assessment of functioning socially, occupationally, and leisurely.
One of the psychological disorders is the anxiety disorder. Obviously, everyone has experienced some level of anxiety in their life, but for some people, it is far more severe than just the average anxiety from everyday life. Like a tall ladder could scare someone, or spiders could send chills up their spine. Just things like that. Oh God!
There is also panic disorder. A panic disorder is a disturbance marked by a sudden and severe anxiety attack. They have no obvious connections with events in a person.
Being afraid of spiders is one thing, but when you have an irrational fear, that's called a phobia. These, however, don't become psychopathology until they have a substantial disruption in your life. There's also OCD, PTSD, and many other disorders.
Schizophrenia is a psychological disorder involving distortions in thoughts, perceptions, or emotions. It is also referred to as madness, psychosis, or insanity. It is the most severe disorder.
It is characterized by hallucinations, delusions, apathy, thinking abnormalities, and being split between thoughts and emotions. About 1 in every 100 Americans are affected by it, and over 200 million people over the age of 18 can be affected.
Now, there are 5 types of schizophrenia. The first type is the disorganized type. They have incoherent speech, hallucinations, delusions, and odd behaviors. Now, catatonic type have a range of motor dysfunctions, but none of what was previously listed, so they're basically opposites. Paranoid type has delusions and hallucinations, but not like catatonic or disorganized types. The undifferentiated type have erratic symptoms and do not fit into any of the categories, but still have clear symptoms. And the final type is residual. They have suffered from schizophrenia in the past, but now they don't suffer from it. but they don't have major symptoms.
Everyone and anyone can be affected by a psychological disorder. Some well-known people are Audrey Hepburn, Angelina Jolie, Albert Einstein, Edgar Allan Poe, Elton John, Janet Jackson, Jim Carrey, Jessica Alba, and Dick Clark.